say if I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
Rachel Zegler has just learned that Disney is going to reimagine Snow White for a second time, and she is in the most raging wrath she has ever experienced. You would think that Disney would be more cautious after all of the turmoil, the criticism, and the failure to make $115 million at the box office, but they are not. For Rachel, who has never been one to keep quiet, they were the ones who blew the fuse. Her ideas are seeping out, she is throwing shade, and she is hinting at significant instability behind the scenes. Her remarks range from subtle barbs to full-on wrath. In addition, believe me when I say that what she says next could very well blow the whole thing wide open. However, where exactly did all of this mayhem start? In October of 2016, when Disney was feeling particularly ambitious, let's go back in time. When they made the announcement that they were working on a live-action adaptation of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, many people thought it was a really daring move. It was decided that Mark Platt Productions would be in charge of producing, and in order to add some excitement to the proceedings, they recruited Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, the same team that was responsible for La La Land and The Greatest Showman. It was only logical that people had extremely high expectations, given that glitter, jazz hands, and forest creatures are all things that might possibly go wrong, right? Now, let's fast forward to the month of May 2019, when producer Mark Webb became a member of the team. At that point, the fans were either extremely excited or really perplexed. One thing is to be able to swing through New York City as Spider-Man, but it is an entirely different experience to be able to direct talking animals and a queen who is jealous. But the situation continued to improve, and for a time, it appeared to be an optimistic sign. Twitter was going about its business in June of 2021, when all of a sudden, Disney announced that Rachel Zegler would be taking over the role of Snow White. The legendary gown was being worn by the voice of the powerhouse who had performed in West Side Story. Then, in November, things became even more exciting when Gal Gadot, who is also known as Miss Wonder Woman, made the decision to assume the role of the evil queen. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to see Gal grinning as she is wearing a floor-length cloak and scheming sabotage based on mirrors? Even yet, she claimed that she was thrilled to play the role of the villain.
You're not playing Snow White. You're playing the iconic evil queen.
Then, in January of 2022, we were confronted with yet another astonishing revelation. This time, there would be no Prince Charming. Instead, we got a new character that was a spin-off of Robin Hood, and Andrew Burnap played him. It was obvious that Disney was in the mood to shake things up. On the other hand, a fire broke out on the set in March of 2022, just as the cast was being assembled and the forest was about to come to life. The damage, thankfully, did not result in any injuries, but it did cause delays. As the production continued until July 2022, it featured expansive sets, dramatic lighting, and a great deal of green screen magic. On the other hand, when they finally came to the conclusion that it was time to wind things up, they were surprised to find that test screenings were not exactly celebrating Disney's achievements. As a result, the team decided to reshoot the segment in June of 2024. Having said that, let's move on to discussing some of the debates. A comment was made by Peter Dinklage, who referred to the concept of the Seven Dwarfs in their entirety.
You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that fucking backward story of seven dwarfs living in a cave. What the f are you doing, man?
At that moment, Disney slammed on the brakes and declared, okay, fine, they're magical creatures now. And to really mix things up, they added some computer-generated imagery wizardry. Was the issue resolved as a result of that? No, not really. There were members of the dwarfism community who were dissatisfied with the situation and referred to it as a missed opportunity for true representation. Rachel Zegler, on the other hand, is the subject of the most significant debates. As soon as Disney announced that she would be taking on the part of Snow White, the number of takes that she received began to increase almost instantly. On one side, people were exulting over the long-awaited diversity that had finally arrived. On the other hand, let's just say that the audience that felt more comfortable with the classic Snow White had some reservations about the story. All of a sudden, Snow White suddenly became popular for all of the wrong reasons. Despite the fact that we are discussing a story that involves talking woodland animals and a girl who befriends 7 odd people in the forest, critics have protested that Disney is rewriting history. Despite this, Rachel did not back down. In its place, she emphasized the significance of representation, drew attention to the fact that Snow White is a well-liked character in Spanish-speaking countries, and expressed her excitement about the prospect of giving the character a fresh perspective. At the same time, everyone was paying attention, regardless of whether they were clapping or cringing. You should fasten your seatbelts, however, since we are just getting started with the controversy surrounding the casting. In an interview that took place in 2022, Rachel referred to the first version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as extremely dated, and you could almost hear the collective gasp from Disney fans all around the world. But that wasn't the end of her story. In addition, she stated that the prince in the movie was weird and made it abundantly clear that her interpretation of Snow White was not someone who was just sitting about waiting for some random guy to come along and cure her life.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Some admirers praised this interpretation, describing it as invigorating, contemporary, and well overdue. However, some people were really insulted. The situation then became political. Rachel made a post on social media in August 2024, shortly after the teaser trailer had been released. At the time, everyone was either grieving over the computer-generated deer or making fun of the absence of the dwarf heroes. Only 2 words remained at the end of her post: "Free Palestine." Immediately after that, the number of comments skyrocketed. The reason for this is that while Rachel was advocating for Palestinian rights, her co-star Gal Gadot was openly supporting Israel. And if you're curious about what transpired after that, the answer is in a word: mayhem. Threats of boycotts were made, comment sections became crowded with Hunger Games-style discussions, and fans began analyzing every promotional photo for indications of side-eye. The situation then became even more dire. Someone uncovered Rachel's earlier tweets, which included the kind of tweets that criticized former President Donald Trump and caused a great deal of discord among his supporters. This was the moment when an entirely new storm began to develop. Reposting, replying, canceling, and defending were all activities that people were engaging in, and it was really taxing. Rachel was required to submit an apology by the month of November 2024.
I can only hope that despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them, that at every premiere, everything I do, people will wait and learn to see.
She stated that she had no intention of causing harm to anyone, and that all she desired was peace. However, by that point, the damage had already been done, and the atmosphere on set was entirely off. There was a general consensus that Rachel and Gal did not share the same set of values and beliefs. At the same time, when Rachel was expressing her support for Palestine, Gal was standing in the same manner.
That my name is Gal, and I'm Jewish, and we have had enough of Jew hatred.
However, politics was not the only factor that contributed to their estrangement. Reporters whispered about the tension that was occurring on set, and some even said that Disney had to provide more protection for Gal after threats began to come in continuously. What's the clincher? The studio planned separate press appearances for each of the actresses. There was not even a single stage laugh that took place on a couch that was shared by both of them. Furthermore, in the entertainment industry, this is essentially a euphemism for "they most certainly are not friends." Imagine now that the marketing team at Disney is sending out panicked emails, altering trailers in a hurry, and employing a full-fledged social media babysitter to keep a close eye on Rachel's accounts like a hawk. Compared to anything that had ever been seen before, the promotional rollout was completely odd. On the red carpet, there was a tense atmosphere, joint appearances were uncommon, and interviews were conducted with caution. Snow White was released in theaters across the United States and Canada on March 21st, 2025. This date became the official release date. As for the numbers, well, they were not charming at all. The domestic box office receipts for the opening weekend were approximately $42.2 million, which was already a little lower than the $45 to $55 million that were anticipated. Not only that, but it didn't get any better when we went overseas. For the great global opening, over $87.3 million was collected from international markets, which brought the total to almost $45.1 million. To put that into perspective, let's look at it now. The production expense for this film was somewhere between $240 and $270 million, and that's without even taking into account the marketing blitz that Disney poured at it. Additionally, as of the beginning of April, the film had managed to amass a total of $71.4 million in the United States and $75.8 million internationally. That amounts to a total gross of $147.2 million around the globe. Simply put, this indicates that Disney was on the verge of suffering a financial loss of approximately $115 million. Where did things go wrong? In any case, Rachel Zegler performed like a seasoned professional after the film's release. Rachel stood by her work and expressed her pride in the way the film reinterpreted the story, even though the critics did not precisely appreciate her effort.
It's very validating. A lot of hard work has gone into this film, but so much love, truly, speaking for myself and also for the filmmakers behind it.
We made it our mission to present a new point of view. Not only did she realize that not everyone was experiencing the same emotions, but she remained steadfast in her belief that the movie had heart, which is very amazing. However, depending on who you ask, Snow White did not merely receive a makeover, rather, she received a complete replacement of her personality. In addition, what about Gal Gadot's? She maintained a refined demeanor. Gal uttered the timeless phrase, "We all put our hearts into it," when mentioning that the production of a film is a collaborative endeavor. To tell you the truth, it hurts when you go through all of that crown-wearing and apple poisoning, and then the movie fails to live up to your expectations. On the other hand, what about the reviews? A total of 215 reviews were used to determine the film's rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and the average score was a very average 5.2 out of 10. The picture received a lukewarm 42%. When you're watching a fairy tale and you can't tell if it's a musical, a feminist manifesto, or a CGI fever dream, you know something is off. The consensus among reviews simply was that Zegler is fantastic, but the movie is unsure what it wants to be. This is fair, since when you're watching a fairy tale and you can't tell what it wants to be, you know something is wrong. In no way was Metacritic more pleasant. The movie had a score of 50 out of 100, which indicates that it was a bit of a disappointment. At the same time, the audience members were not precisely throwing confetti. Despite the fact that it received a B+ from CinemaScore, which is not a terrible rating, it is not the kind of positive feedback that Disney was hoping for. The audience praised Rachel's performance, but they did not particularly appreciate the narrative, visuals, or the adjustments that were made to the original story. A significant number of admirers left the theater, perplexed as to why Snow White was suddenly orchestrating a revolution rather than simply singing to birds. Then, the effect of the ripples began to occur. It is a sign that things are going to get worse when your failure begins to drag down your subsequent films. Due to the fact that the following transpired, the proposed live-action remake of Tangled, which had director Michael Gracie set to go, and writer Jennifer Caitlin Robinson, already planning Rapunzel's next big number, has been put on hold indefinitely by Disney. This decision was made in a stealthy manner. It would appear that Disney became anxious after seeing the humiliating fall of Snow White. At that moment, it was no longer simply about a single movie that was not performing well. Rather, it was about the entire future of their live-action universe. Before taking any further action, the studio has made the decision to wait and see how well Lilo and Stitch and Moana perform. Anyway, I hope you all had fun watching. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think this movie truly deserves all the backlash? Or is Rachel Zegler's attitude making it seem worse than it really is? I'd love to hear your take. If you liked the video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and have an awesome day. Catch you in the next one.